The Olympic Games are meant to celebrate human excellence, unity, and triumph, but not every moment has lived up to that ideal. Here are 5 of the most horrifying Olympic tragedies that left the world stunned. The 1904 Summer Olympics Marathon is remembered not as a celebration of endurance, but as one of the most chaotic and disturbing races ever staged in Olympic history. What was meant to showcase human strength instead became a brutal experiment in suffering, one that pushed athletes to the edge of collapse and nearly led to the event being removed from the Olympic program entirely. Set against the sweltering heat of a St. Louis summer, the race unfolded under conditions that bordered on inhumane. Temperatures soared above 30 Celsius, while runners were forced to navigate hilly, unpaved roads thick with dust. Each step kicked up clouds that choked the ilhawo and burned the lungs, turning the marathon into a battle not just against distance, but against the environment itself. Yet, despite these extreme conditions, organizers made a decision that would define the tragedy of the event. Water was almost entirely absent. Only a single water station existed along the entire route, leaving athletes to endure dehydration for miles under relentless heat. The consequences were immediate and severe. Out of 32 runners who began the race, more than half were unable to finish. One by one, competitors collapsed from exhaustion, dizziness, and heat stroke. The marathon quickly transformed into a scene of physical breakdown, where survival became more important than victory. It was no longer a race. It was an ordeal. Amid the chaos, bizarre and unsettling incidents unfolded. One runner was forced off course by a pack of wild dogs, losing valuable time and energy in a desperate attempt to escape. Another, weakened by hunger, stopped along the route to eat fruit he found, only to suffer intense stomach cramps that nearly ended his race. These moments, strange as they were, highlighted just how unprepared both the athletes and the organizers were for the reality of such extreme conditions. But the most shocking chapter of the race came with its supposed winner. Thomas Hicks crossed the finish line after hours of visible agony, barely able to stand. For the final stretch, his body was failing him completely. In a desperate attempt to keep him moving, his handlers administered a mixture of substances that included a powerful stimulant, something now recognized as highly toxic in larger doses. Supported by others, he staggered across the finish line, physically broken and on the brink of collapse. His victory, rather than triumphant, appeared deeply unsettling. A man pushed far beyond his natural limits by artificial means. Even more scandalous was the case of Fred Lors, who initially crossed the finish line to roaring applause. For a brief moment, he was celebrated as the champion, until the truth emerged. After becoming exhausted earlier in the race, he had secretly traveled a large portion of the course by car before rejoining near the end and running the final stretch. What seemed like an incredible performance quickly unraveled into one of the most infamous acts of deception in Olympic history. By the time the race ended, it had left behind more questions than achievements. The event exposed glaring flaws in organization, a lack of understanding about human endurance, and a shocking disregard for athlete safety. Many began to question whether the marathon itself was too dangerous to continue as an Olympic event. The race had not just tested the limits of athletes, it had revealed the limits of the Olympic movement's responsibility toward them. In the aftermath, the fallout led to lasting changes. The use of performance-enhancing substances, so openly demonstrated during the race, eventually contributed to the introduction of early anti-doping regulations. More importantly, the disaster forced a re-evaluation of how endurance events should be conducted, emphasizing safety, hydration, and proper conditions. Despite its dark legacy, the marathon survived. But the 1904 race remains a haunting reminder of a time when ambition outpaced understanding. It stands as a chilling chapter in Olympic history, where the pursuit of glory descended into chaos, and the line between competition and catastrophe was dangerously blurred. The arena was tense, the stakes impossibly high. In the equestrian competition at the 1936 Summer Olympics, the German team stood on the edge of victory, but everything depended on the final jumping test. One mistake, one misstep, and their hopes of securing a medal would collapse. The pressure was immense, not just for the riders but for the horses carrying them through a course designed to test precision and control. Among them was Kurt Hasse, mounted on his horse Kurfürst. By all accounts, the horse appeared strong, energetic, and ready for the challenge ahead. As they entered the course, there was a sense that everything was falling into place. The jumps were being cleared, the rhythm steady, the performance controlled. For a brief moment, it seemed as though victory was within reach. Then came the next obstacle, the in and out, a technical sequence that demanded perfect timing and trust between rider and horse. As Kurfürst approached the second fence, something shifted. Instead of maintaining control, the horse surged forward with unexpected force, charging toward the jump with more speed than precision. In that split second, instinct took over. Hasse pulled sharply on the reins, trying to regain control. What followed was catastrophic. Kurfürst reared violently, losing balance in the process. The massive animal toppled backward, crashing into the obstacle behind him. The fall was sudden and brutal. For a moment, horse and rider disappeared into a tangled collapse of Ilkut and Osn, with Hasse trapped beneath the animal. The stadium, filled with tens of thousands of spectators, fell into stunned silence. What had been a display of skill and elegance turned instantly into a scene of fear and uncertainty. There was no movement from the horse. From the stands, it appeared as though Kurfürst had been killed by the fall. The stillness was unsettling. A creature that moments earlier had been full of life now lay motionless on the ground. Around him, the tension grew heavier with each passing second. The entire competition seemed to hang in that silence, suspended between triumph and disaster. Somehow, Hasse managed to pull himself free. Emerging from beneath the fallen horse, he scrambled to safety, shaken but alive. Yet all eyes remained fixed on Kurfürst, whose condition remained unclear. Then, in a moment that felt almost unreal, the horse stirred. As if jolted back to life, he rose to his feet, regaining balance with a sudden, almost unnatural burst of energy. What happened next defied logic. Without assistance, Hasse climbed back onto Kurfürst. There was no pause, no visible hesitation. Despite the violent scoot they had just endured, the pair continued the course as though nothing had happened. From that point onward, they completed every remaining jump without error. The earlier disaster seemed to vanish beneath a display of relentless determination. But beneath that determination lay something far more unsettling. Kurfürst had already accumulated a staggering number of penalty points during the earlier phases of the competition. The fall should have marked the end, not just of the run, but of any realistic chance at success. Yet somehow, against all expectations, the German team still secured victory in the team event. The crowd erupted. What had begun in silence exploded into overwhelming noise as spectators celebrated the outcome. To them, it was a moment of triumph, a dramatic comeback that would be remembered for years. But behind the spectacle was a darker reality, one that raised uncomfortable questions about the limits pushed, the risks ignored, and the cost of victory. This was not just a competition. It was a collision between control and chaos. The fall, the recovery, and the continuation blurred the line between resilience and recklessness. Horse and rider had been pushed to a point where instinct replaced judgment, and survival became secondary to completion. In many ways, this moment captured something deeper about the early Olympic Games. Beneath the structure and rules, there existed an undercurrent of unpredictability, an intensity that could turn any event into something far more dangerous than intended. Long before modern safety standards and refined regulations, there was a rawness to competition that often bordered on the extreme. The incident involving Kurfürst stands as a powerful reminder of that era. It reflects a time when the pursuit of victory could override caution, when even a violent fall was not enough to stop the momentum of competition. What the crowd witnessed as a dramatic success was, in reality, a moment suspended between disaster and determination. The 2010 Winter Olympics were meant to begin with celebration, unity, and the thrill of elite competition. Instead, before the opening ceremony could even take place, the world was confronted with a moment of shock that cast a long, haunting shadow over the entire event. During a training run on the notoriously fast Whistler sliding track, Nodar Kumaritashvili was racing down the icy course at extraordinary speed. Luge is already one of the most dangerous sports in the Winter Olympics, a discipline where athletes lie flat on a sled, hurtling, feet first through narrow curves at speeds that push the limits of human reaction. Every turn demands absolute precision. There is no margin for error. As Kumaritashvili approached the final stretch of the track, something went catastrophically wrong. In the last curve, a section already known for its extreme speed, he lost control. His sled slammed into the inner wall, and in a fraction of a second, the force of the impact launched his body into the air. He was thrown violently over the track's boundary, clearing the protective barrier entirely. The scene unfolded so quickly that there was no time to react, no chance to recover. His sled continued along the ice without him, while fragments of the moment, his visor, the echo of impact, remained behind on the track. Rescue teams were at his side almost immediately. Within seconds, medical personnel rushed in, initiating emergency procedures with urgency and precision. Chest compressions began almost instantly, followed by attempts to restore breathing. The response was swift, coordinated, and desperate. Within minutes, he was airlifted to a nearby trauma center in Whistler, as officials and athletes alike waited in stunned disbelief. But despite every effort, the outcome could not be reversed. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Olympic community. Training sessions were halted, and the remainder of the day's events were canceled. What had been a place of intense preparation and competition suddenly became a site of mourning and uncertainty. Officials launched an immediate investigation, focusing on the safety of the track, a structure that had already raised concerns in the months leading up to the Games. The Whistler track had developed a reputation long before the Shadith. Its design allowed for unprecedented speeds, pushing athletes faster than ever before in Olympic history. Some teams had expressed unease about limited access to the track for training, suggesting that unfamiliarity with such a demanding course could increase the risk of accidents. Those concerns, once debated quietly, now took on a far more urgent and tragic significance. Luge, by its very nature, is unforgiving. It is the only Winter Olympic sport measured down to 1,000th of a second, a reflection of just how fast and precise it is. At such speeds, even the slightest miscalculation can have devastating consequences. Kumaritashvili's crash was a stark reminder of that reality. A moment where physics, speed, and human vulnerability collided with irreversible force. The impact of his death extended far beyond the track. Athletes who had trained for years suddenly found themselves confronting the dangers of their sport in the most direct way possible. Coaches, officials, and spectators were left shaken, struggling to process what they had witnessed. The Games, meant to symbolize excellence and unity, now carried an undercurrent of grief. This was not the first fatality in Olympic winter sports, but it was the first in nearly 2 decades, a rare yet deeply unsettling occurrence that reminded the world of the risks hidden beneath the spectacle. It forced a reevaluation of safety measures, track design, and the balance between pushing athletic limits and protecting those who take part. In the end, the tragedy of Nodar Kumaritashvili became one of the most sobering moments in Olympic history. It was not just a loss of a young athlete, but a moment that exposed the fragile line between competition and catastrophe. The 2016 Summer Olympics were filled with moments of triumph, resilience, and record-breaking performances. But among them was one incident so sudden and disturbing that it left audiences around the world in shock. A reminder that even at the highest level of competition, the human body has limits that cannot be pushed without consequence. Andranik Karapetyan entered the men's 77 kg weightlifting event as a strong contender. His performance in the snatch had already placed him among the top competitors. Lifting an impressive 174 kilograms, he demonstrated both strength and control, positioning himself within reach of a podium finish. The momentum was on his side, and the possibility of securing a medal seemed well within reach. As the competition moved into the clean and jerk phase, the stakes intensified. Each lift carried greater pressure, each attempt demanding not only physical power but absolute precision. Karapetyan stepped forward for his third attempt, preparing to lift 195 kilograms, a weight that could have propelled him into medal position. The arena was tense, every eye fixed on the platform as he prepared for the decisive moment. The lift began smoothly, He brought the barbell up from the ground, transitioning into position with controlled force. For a brief second, everything appeared aligned. Then, in an instant, the moment unraveled. As he pushed the weight overhead, his elbow gave way. The joint bent violently in the wrong direction, collapsing under the immense load. It was a movement so unnatural, so sudden, that it stunned everyone watching. The barbell dropped behind him as control was lost, crashing onto the platform. The sound echoed through the arena, followed by something even more unsettling. The raw, unmistakable reaction of pain. Karapetyan stepped away, his body recoiling from the injury. The attempt was over, but the damage had already been done. Coaches and medical staff rushed in immediately, surrounding him as he struggled to process what had just occurred. The competition continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. What had been a moment of anticipation turned into one of shock and concern. The injury was not just a setback, it was a stark illustration of the risks embedded in elite weightlifting. At such extreme levels, the body operates at the very edge of its capabilities. Muscles, tendons, and joints are subjected to forces that leave no room for error. When something fails, it does so dramatically. What made the moment even more striking was how close Karapetyan had been to success. Had he completed the lift, he would have secured a place among the medalists, surpassing rivals and solidifying his standing on the Olympic stage. Instead, in a fraction of a second, that opportunity vanished, replaced by an injury that halted his competition entirely. Incidents like this reveal a different side of the Olympics, one that exists beneath the celebration of victory. Behind every lift, every sprint, and every performance lies an immense physical toll. Athletes train for years to reach this level, pushing their bodies beyond ordinary limits in pursuit of excellence. But in doing so, they also step into a space where the margin between success and catastrophe is incredibly thin. For spectators, the moment was difficult to watch. The suddenness of the injury, combined with its severity, made it one of the most unforgettable scenes of the Games. It was not just about the loss of a lift or a medal, but the visible breaking point of the human body under extreme pressure. In the end, Karapetyan's performance became defined not by what he achieved, but by what happened in that final attempt. It was a moment that captured both the ambition and the risk of Olympic competition, a powerful reminder that even the strongest athletes are not immune to the limits of their own bodies. The Olympic Games have always been more than just competition. From the very beginning, they were designed to represent unity, peace, and a shared human spirit that transcends borders. Among the many traditions woven into the opening ceremonies, few were as symbolic or as visually powerful as the release of doves. Graceful and white, they were meant to embody harmony, freedom, and hope for a peaceful world. The tradition traces back to the early modern Olympics, with roots formally established during the 1920 Summer Olympics. Since then, the image of doves taking flight above a packed stadium became one of the most recognizable and emotional moments of the ceremony. For decades, it was a quiet, elegant gesture that contrasted with the grandeur and spectacle of the Games. A simple release of birds carried a message far greater than words. But in the 1988 Summer Olympics, that carefully preserved symbolism took a deeply unsettling turn. As the ceremony built toward its climax, 3 athletes made their way toward the towering Olympic cauldron, elevated above the stadium floor. The moment was designed to be powerful, a dramatic culmination of music, performance, and national pride. Below, thousands of spectators watched in anticipation, while millions more followed the broadcast across the globe. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. But unnoticed at first, several of the doves released earlier had not flown away. Drawn perhaps by the height or structure, they settled quietly along the rim of the massive cauldron. Perched against the metal surface, they remained still, blending into the spectacle, overlooked in the build-up to the final moment. As the athletes prepared to ignite the flame, the danger went unseen. Then, in an instant, the ceremony crossed a line no one had anticipated. The cauldron was lit. Flames surged upward, consuming everything in their path, including the birds that had remained perched on its edge. What was meant to symbolize peace transformed into something deeply disturbing. The image of white doves, once representing purity and unity, was replaced by a shocking scene unfolding live before a global audience. The silence of the stadium gave way to a collective realization that something had gone terribly wrong. It was not just an accident. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of control within one of the world's most meticulously planned events. The Olympic ceremony, known for its precision and perfection, had revealed a vulnerability. A single overlooked detail had turned a symbol of peace into an unforgettable and uncomfortable spectacle. The reaction was immediate and lasting. Viewers around the world were left stunned, and the incident quickly became one of the most controversial moments in Olympic ceremony history. It sparked outrage among animal rights advocates and forced organizers to reconsider a tradition that had long been taken for granted. In the years that followed, changes were inevitable. By the time the 1992 Summer Olympics arrived, the approach had been carefully revised. Doves were still part of the ceremony, but the timing was altered significantly. They were released well before the lighting of the cauldron, ensuring there was no possibility of a repeat incident. Eventually, many ceremonies moved away from using live birds altogether, opting instead for symbolic or artistic representations.